Hello, Earthlings, and welcome along to the, hang on, what day is it? Monday, must be the Animal Rights Show. I've pushed all the right buttons so far, but the new thing for 2023 is that one countdown is not enough, so... Oh, the miracle of the internet, eh, people?
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
I just wish we just had more countdowns, like right to the end of the show. Just do countdowns.
Yeah, just that's all.
More and more creative.
Yeah. Well,
maybe we should all a countdown for each one of us to come on.
We've got a few in the house. Do you want to welcome a couple of people? So we've got Deb. Somebody called Roger Yates. Oh no, that's Deb from a long time ago. Yeah, that's right. That was before the first cancel. That was weird. Okay, so we've got Deb again. The spiritual vegan. Have the clocks gone back? No, apparently not yet. We had a bit of confusion because the clocks have moved in relation to Mark, not ourselves. Canadian Vegan Forever, hello, Colleen, and Vein Ammonian, we think, I'm still going to get that wrong. I apologize for that. I'm going to get that wrong for weeks. So there you go on that. Right. Okay. So as you can see, we have a guest panelist, which is Professor Marc Bekoff. So hello, Mark.
Hello.
Hi, Mark.
Welcome.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. It worked.
This is your second time on the show, I think, Mark, isn't it?
What?
Second time, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, because you were on a podcast with me years and years ago when we talked about pigeon funerals and all that. Do you remember that? Or
I do.
Yeah.
How could you forget a pigeon funeral? No, it was magpie funeral.
Well, I was talking about pigeon funerals because I'd just seen one. And I was asking you whether you think it was real, as it were, and you said yes.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Wendy, this is the blurb that you put together.
Yes. Shall I read it in case people can't be bothered to read it, or it's too small on their screens, which is another thing as well.
Yeah,
so
that'd be another thing.
This week, Marc Bekoff will share his expertise on how the well-being. Sorry, Dylan's joining in.
Dylan is doing the intro.
I like that.
Just say that again. This week, Marc Bekoff will share his expertise on how the well-being of individual animals might be centered in the difficult world of conservation, where the interests of different species of animal, including humans, often collide. The team will explore the ways in which humans can coexist more harmoniously with other free-living and so-called domesticated animals in a shift away from speciesism and towards a more just world for all.
Indeed. So, yes. Welcome to the Dylan Show, everyone.
I've been giving a bit of a disclaimer all day as well. I had to give a disclaimer to my classes this morning because I had no sleep because of young Dylan, because he's had a poorly tummy. So he was up all night on the hour, every hour. Poor little rascal. So yeah. So excuse anything that might come out of my mouth that doesn't make sense. Any more than usual, anyway.
Oh, don't worry.
So are you all sorted, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak a bit. I didn't prepare anything really formal, but I'm sure.
No, we've just picked out a few. I mean, I think this might be the substance of what you may want to talk about, which is the compassionate conservation thing.
Yeah. Right.
And before we begin, could we ask you for the definition of compassionate conservation?
Yep, I'm going to start. Ready?
Yeah,
yes.
Shoot.
Okay. Go. Yeah, I mean, the introduction was fine because the basic tenets of compassionate conservation are first, do no harm. First, do no harm. The lives of every individual matter, and there's a couple of more, like, respecting all wildlife, respecting
value all life, and peaceful coexistence.
And
right?
peaceful coexistence, right. But the shift from a conservation biology point of view, because I am a biologist, is to, in a sense, to replace the value of species with the value of each and every individual. So the traditional conservation really favors species over individuals. Some people will debate it, but I've been doing it long enough to say that that's really true, because some conservationists will say, well, if there's 50,000 brown rats, it's okay to kill 1,000 of them because there's more. So they play what I call the numbers game. But compassionate conservation would say, no, that's not really fair, if you will, to the individuals who you decide to kill. And that's really in many ways, that's the big difference between, say, traditional conservation and compassionate conservation. And in our book, The Animal's Agenda, Jessica Pierce and I developed the science of animal well-being in contrast to the science of animal welfare, because animal welfare takes the same point of view. People will argue about it, but if you breed, you rear thousands of mice, and you decide it's okay to murder a few of them because there's many more like them, then that's really not fair to the mice who you kill. So the science of animal well-being, it actually came on fairly coincidentally in my own head, but they both emerged at the same time in terms of the value of individuals. But in fact, Dale Jamieson, who's a philosopher with whom I've written a lot of papers and a few books, we wrote about this back in 1990. We wrote a paper called Reflective Ethology. And then we wrote one called basically Doing Science While Respecting Animals. So the roots of the value of individuals was laid many years ago. And James Rachel's, a philosopher, and I'm forgetting the name of his book right now, but he too argued that the life of every individual matters. So it's really, some people say, well, the critics of compassionate conservation, many of them never really read what we've written. So they'll say that we're against maintaining or increasing biodiversity, which isn't true at all. They'll say it's elitist, but some of the best programs are in various parts of the world where there's anything but elitism. Some think it's male dominated, or whatever the PC word now is. But in fact, people like Ariane Wallach, and Chelsea Batavia, and many others have contributed to the field. I think what happens is they're scared because biologists typically don't like to use the word compassion or sympathy or empathy. Some do, of course. I'm a biologist, but they get freaked out by that kind of thing. They also get freaked out because it argues against killing other animals. And traditional conservation is a bloody activity. Some people call it bloody sport. So it's right. It's Created from Animals by James Rachels, which is a fascinating book. I used to ask my biology students to read it, and many did and really liked it. But anyway, that's really what that's a quick summary of compassionate conservation. And so it's not speciesistic, because it's not saying that the lives of wolves count more than the lives of, alligators. It's just saying that all individuals have inherent or intrinsic value, and their lives matter. And the example I use when I give talks, so I guess I'm sort of giving a talk here, but not in person, is if somebody said, there's too many of you, so we need to kill you because there's a lot more like you. And I'd say, no, thank you. I don't think that's a viable option. So, so that's the basis for it. And there's a lot of successes, in different parts of the world. Of course, a lot hangs on what you call a success. But killing animals sometimes does work in the immediate solution. It's like raising dogs and using Cesar Millan, like, brutal punishment techniques. You can get a dog to do anything you want. And if you want to get rid of some members of one species, like barred owls, to save snowy owls, sure, if you kill the barred owls, then the snowy owls will live. But a lot of times those projects don't work in the long run. So that's my 5 cent answer. So,
Mark, can I just ask a question on that, if that's okay? How does that come into play practically? Say, for example, I know that there's a situation here in the UK at the moment where the grey squirrels are there's a big plan to murder grey squirrels because they've been introduced and they are much more hardy than the red squirrels, and so the red squirrels are kind of the numbers are really diminished. In fact, you hardly really see many red squirrels through most of the UK now. Certain places you do, but there's a massive project to kill the grey squirrels in order to make more space for the red squirrels, because I think it's like, habitat, food resources, all that kind of thing. So how would it work in that respect, where I guess you have that clash of the interests of different individuals? For example, grey squirrels maybe being a bit more robust than red squirrels, but red squirrels gradually depleting, and they're the individuals there. And how does it work in terms of how do you weigh up the individuals, and then obviously that particular group and that species are very, very much decimated? How does it work in compassionate conservation in that respect?
Well, I mean, those are, that's a difficult question, and there are no easy answers. I mean, you could put out chemostimulants so that there would be no more of the gray squirrels. You could move them from one place to another. I mean, those are all invasive, and people argue that, well, then you're taking the reproductive rights away from the gray squirrel. But once again, it's kind of like the least of the evils, if you will, but they're still living. But it's a great question, and so the easy, of course, the easy answer is that people brought them in, and now people want to kill them. And so the lesson for the future would be no. I mean, I really do mean that. Like here in Colorado, the people of Colorado voted barely, a majority, I think it was 50.3 to 49.7% of the people, to reintroduce gray wolves to Colorado. It's supposed to happen by the end of this year. But the problem is that there's a lot of resistance to the reintroduction from ranchers and farmers who will definitely lose animals. I mean, it's just a given. Wolves are born predators. But the reason I raised that example is, well, is it fair to trade off the lives of some wolves or other animals, if you were moving them around, for the benefit of the species? And, an individual wolf doesn't really care whether they're a member of an endangered species or not. I mean, they don't have that concept, if you will. So I'm on the fence because of that. Because of that, I'm on the fence. And people say, well, you don't like wolves, or you don't want wolves in Colorado. No, I want live wolves in Colorado. So compassionate conservation would argue that the wolves have to be protected, despite the fact that some will get killed. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So once again, the reason I'm giving that example is some people would say, oh, no, it would be horrible to have wolves die, or say a wolf die for the good of their species, but they wouldn't think twice about it if it was some kind of endangered or previously native rodent, for example. And compassionate conservation would argue that, no, I mean, the life of an individual rodent of some, endangered or, imperiled species counts as much as the life of an individual wolf. So I see compassionate conservation as being anti-speciesist, if you will. And I mean, Wendy's question is a really good one. There are no easy answers, but it just seems like a double cross. I mean, none of us brought these squirrels in, but humans did. And as far as I know, we're all humans, although sometimes I wonder about myself. But seriously, the killing has to stop. I mean, that to me is the bottom line. And that's why I'm a fan of compassionate conservation.
Well, there's a long history, isn't there, of people saying to vegans, there's this problem that we've created. What are you going to do about it? Which has always been fascinating to me. Going back to what you were saying about the individual who is in an endangered species, it doesn't matter to them as an individual, as you said. In fact, Ronnie Lee came into conflict with conservationists on that very basis when the Save the Whale campaign was in full cry, because they were saying all the priorities got to go there. And Ronnie was saying, well, what about X, Y, and Z? Because they value their lives just as much. And so I think you're right about, in terms of, I wrote that down, reflexive ethology. I mean, but the fault line between conservationists and, say, what you might call animal liberationists, and let's bring this back in because I want to ask you a question about that, is always been about the individual versus the group, as you said. And the title surely is the fact that one of the fears is there's a hidden agenda within the concept, right?
Right.
And that really you're using the word compassionate conservation, but really you're an animal liberationist.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is, like, when people ask me what I do, if somebody says, "Oh, you're just an animal rights activist," or whatever pejorative words they'll put before it, I'll just say, "Well, yeah, I guess I am, but really, I favor animal protection, and I don't just play with that. I really, really mean it for a number of reasons." So the reason I put that in there was that essay was a response to somebody, I think, or a group from the Endangered Species Coalition, or whatever they call it, in Australia, where wildlife management and conservation is really wildlife killing. I mean, let's face it. The interesting thing is that the first Center for Compassionate Conservation, I helped put it together, but I'm not I'm part of it now, but is in the University of Technology in Sydney, Australia. And some of the big meetings have been in Australia on compassionate conservation. So I wrote that paper because that's exactly what somebody said, was that this is just animal liberation cashed out in the arena of conservation rather than in laboratory work or factory farms or something like that. But I mean, the person who wrote it had no concept of what we were saying about compassionate conservation. And that's why I said, that some of the critics, I honestly feel that some of them never read what we wrote. But and I had one critic just tell me that was almost true. They just didn't like the word compassion. Somebody said it was very feminine and that there was no room for compassion in science. And I decided I would rather not be in his laboratory.
Patriarchal thinking strikes again, eh?
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
Paris thought we should have any emotions, eh? We shouldn't have emotions.
Well, yeah. I mean, we actually wrote a paper, The Role of Emotion in Conservation. And there was a series of papers in the Journal of Conservation Biology where it's really hard to publish. So we were happy that Arian Wallach, Chelsea Batavia, Dan Ramp, me, and a few other people wrote some papers, and they were published in a traditional conservation biology journal, and we were really happy. And one was the role of emotion in conservation. A lot of my colleagues let their hair down, if you will, when you have a beer with them. But when they get up in front of their colleagues, they just become, it's like Murder Incorporated.
Mm.
Well, you should have
Sounds
a beer
like
with them
fun.
before they get in front of their colleagues.
Oh, I mean, the one nice thing, and I do really mean it, that even though there's a lot of contentious debates and discussions, that in the end, we all want the same thing. I mean, some people will debate that we don't really care about biodiversity, but one of the key things about compassionate conservation is to maintain or restore, I suppose, but biodiversity without killing animals. And I really believe that's going to be the wave of the future. I mean, none of us is going to be around in 100 years. Maybe you all will be. I don't think I will be. And
I'm bound to be for sure.
Oh, okay. Well, good. And Roger, you can. I don't know how you.
The duck is immortal. The duck's already 105. Come on, he's just going to keep going forever.
But
I'm only kidding, Doug. Though.
But this is really
Just
the wave
kidding.
of the future. I mean, the one source of hope I have, among others, is that a lot of grad students in biology usually really want to save species, focus on individuals, and don't want to use the same old paradigms. So there's hope there, because I really get emails saying, I'd really like to study this problem because I study social behavior, social ecology, but I don't want to harm or kill animals to do it. And so I think that over time, they'll just be developing new techniques. And it would not surprise me if 100 years, give or take, down the road, a lot of the killing has stopped. It won't all stop because there's a lot of people out there who like killing animals. I mean,
I'll let you know later on then, Mark.
Okay, yeah.
I have a question. I'm not sure it's relevant. Is it your experience that sometimes traditional conservation is used by political agendas, not because biologists really believe that there is an overpopulation of some species, but because they want to satisfy some lobbyists, hunters, for example? And when I say that, it comes, the situation with foxes in Greece comes in mind, because wildlife organizations say there is no overpopulation of foxes, and yet there is a war against foxes. The wolf situation in Sweden earlier this year. So it seems like governments do whatever they can to gather votes from the hunting lobbies.
Yep. Oh, it's huge. It's kind of even like around Colorado, which is a great outdoor state. You'll basically see license plates or billboards that hunting is pro-conservation, for example. Fishing or angling, I suppose, is pro-conservation. Well, I suppose it depends. If you think it's permissible to kill animals and you're trying to save them or other species by killing them, then I suppose you've already answered the question that it's okay to do it. But the political side is huge. Like in Colorado, a lot of wildlife policy is driven by the money that hunters and fisher people put in. But it turns out that only about 5% of the people in Colorado actually buy hunting and fishing licenses. So, in Colorado, they had a Hug a Hunter and Hug an Angler campaign to sort of, no, seriously, it's among the most bizarre things I've ever seen.
I can think of other things to do to a hunter, but
That's why I'm laughing, Roger.
Here's a question for you, Mark and Nella, then, because in Britain, and Wendy will know this, the hunters claim to be conservationists and pest control operatives at the same time.
Yeah, here too. But a lot of them just redefine animals who they don't like as pests, so therefore they can have their cake and eat it, if you will. But the political side is really huge, and you're right. The other side that's really huge is paradigm science. My mentor did it, and their mentor did it, and their mentor did it. And the other side, like I said before, is how do you define success? Yeah, if you have two animals who are competing and a I mean, maybe the squirrel situation, the owl situation here in the Northwest, and you kill some animals, and then the animals you're trying to save grow in numbers, say they're more abundant, you would call that successful. But it's not successful from the point of view of all the animals you killed. I mean, that's a perverse use of the word success. But the political side is huge. The lying side is huge. The fact, you know, hunting is central to conservation is just insanity. But there's a lot of I'll tell you, there's a lot of very bright people who say that. So maybe a particular part of their brain isn't working, but they really believe it. So you have to overcome that. It's a great question, though. Yeah.
Isn't it interesting how we categorize other animals? So, you know, so like you just said, you know, the pest control, so-called pest control, vermin, we will call other animals vermin when they do well, often, isn't it? When they do well, they thrive in a situation, and then it's inconvenient to humans. So then they're vermin. So then we need to control the numbers. But if you think about taking that logic and like being consistent with it, who are the animals on the planet who are most harmful, most destructive, most, you know, have the biggest detrimental effect on other animals and species destruction, habitat destruction? So where does that, you know, obviously it'd be ours, you know, we would be pressing the red button on ourselves. So the logic is very inconsistent, isn't it? It's very, you know, let's cherry pick exactly what to do and who we want to kill.
There's something on the screen from Deb Thompson that says a lot of traditional conservationists have a hierarchy of species. And that's exactly what you're getting to, I think, Wendy, that we make a hierarchy, we construct it, and of course we put ourselves on top, often not only above but separate from other species who are below us. I mean, that kind of stuff is just pure junk. These pyramids, these hierarchies, this talking about lower and higher species. E.O. Wilson, the late E.O. Wilson, sadly, but who studied ants and insects, he once said something like, you know, if all the wolves disappeared on the planet, we wouldn't even know it. If all the ants disappeared, the planet would go to hell in a handbasket. And that's exactly true. So it's thinking of animals, mammals, just say, or great apes, you know, because we're closer to them than we are to, I don't know, rodents, except I know a lot of people who are very close to rodents. I think that this hierarchical type of structure is really speciesistic. It's a classic example of speciesism, where you take animals who behave like us or look like us or with whom we share a lot of genes, and they go on the top. And then you've got higher and lower species. I just recently had an email that was really disturbing from somebody I really respect, who was trying to argue that kind of delineation or that kind of gradation was really fair. And what a lot of people do, and this is another question getting back to compassion or conservation, the role of emotion, is sentience is becoming a hot word now. And people could beat it to death and people can write a million books about it. But sentience means feeling. Well, it's emotional intelligence, if you will, not intellect. So they'll say, well, you know, dogs and wolves or carnivores can do certain things that rodents can't do. True. But rodents can do and insects, by the way, can do a lot of things that wolves and non-human primates can't do. The reason I'm saying that is that because to me, compassion and conservation and other ideas of that ilk depend on feeling. They depend on sentience. But then some people will say, well, what about animals for whom we're not sure whether they're sentient? Well, to me, it doesn't matter. They're alive and their life is worth living. But there are some people who will use sentience as the marker and just say, well, if we're sure they don't feel, then it's okay to kill them. And then I think, or they don't know what's happening. And I think of people who are suffering from dementia, like my mom did, and others. And no, thank you. It wouldn't have been right to kill my mother because she wouldn't have known what was happening, and she likely would not have known. So I'm not trying to be a blanket.
That's really interesting to me, though, Mark. I mean, this is one of the slides that we've got ready, which is one of your articles. And
oh yeah, right.
what is the state of play now with people's acceptance? Because you do have, in fact, I think it's the next one. No, it's not the next one. Where is it? That's the one there. You were talking about even the former skeptics now are starting to come around a little bit, and so. Are we getting anywhere with the sentience situation, or is there still kind of pushback?
Well, it's a great question. So, University of Denver, just a couple, 30 miles from me, now has an Institute for Sentience and Animal Protection. It's the only one like it in the world. They two professors there got a lot of money from a veterinarian who had nothing to do with University of Denver. But your question is a really good one, because about 35, maybe more today, countries have declared animals to be sentient beings. A lot of cities and townships have as well. But like New Zealand was one of the first. They even think rivers and trees are sentient. And they have a war on wildlife where they're using 1080 poison, snares, traps. They're teaching youngsters to go out and shoot them. Shoot the animals, the invasive predators, if you will. Spain just declared animals to be sentient, but they still have bullfighting. The reason I'm saying that is I don't want to perjure the declaration that animals are sentient. I really don't. I think it's a great conversation starter like we're having, but on the ground, it hasn't meant a hell of a lot. I mean, these countries declare animals to be sentient, including dogs, and there's dog fighting in some of the countries in which cockfighting. I mean, and puppy mills, and New Zealand's war on wildlife, and bullfighting. So people will go, it doesn't really matter. I think it does matter, because you asked that question. And the more people who ask that question will see the hypocrisy that's emerged or continuing in these countries. But it gets the discussion going. And last week, there was a launch of this institute in Denver, for example. And the governor of the state with whom I work closely and a number of people gave, speeches supporting it. And Jane Goodall, who in fact will be here tomorrow, wrote a supporting statement for it. So it gets the conversation going. People who haven't thought about it. I had a discussion last week with somebody at a coffee shop. I didn't know them. And woman in line said, "Oh, how are you?" I said, "I'm fine." And she said, "What are you doing?" I told her. And then and she had a dog, and I said, "Oh, is that your dog?" And she clearly loved her dog. She had it tucked under her jacket where dogs weren't allowed. So to me, that was a plus, but we talked about it, and we talked about sentience. And she said, "Yeah, I don't understand it." I said, "Well, you can beat it to death like academics do, but it really just means feeling. Like Jeremy Bentham's, it's not whether they can talk or reason, can they suffer?" So the reason I'm saying that, and then I will quiet down, is that's really the basis of compassionate conservation. But if you aren't sentient and you're a member of a otherwise sentient species, or you're not sentient and we don't know about whether individuals of your species are sentient, it's not a license to kill, as James Bond would say. It just means that, but I've heard some people, and I was shocked, actually, to use sentience as a marker.
It's funny how people use suspected non-sentience as an excuse to kill, but they don't use sentience as a reason not to kill. So it kind of works basically in whatever way people choose to.
But that feeds into what I want to ask as a follow-up to Mark on this issue. And a nice move from moving from Jane Goodall into James Bond smoothly. I like that. But
Jane will be delighted, I'm sure.
I'll tell her tomorrow. I'm sure she knew Sean Connery.
They got a license to conserve. But In the chat, there is someone from Sentient Rights Island, Dennis, one of the prime movers in Sentient Rights Island, a new political party. And he was explaining how the way that the declarations that you've mentioned about sentience from the various governments, it's what it's basically been translated as is that we need to do better in terms of welfare. And one of the kind of loopholes that have been built in is the fact that they've added this thing about, but we should respect cultural traditions, which is just a massive hole that you can drive anything through, such as bullfighting.
Yep. Mm. Are you asking me what I think about that?
I am.
Well, are there any other questions? No. We get pulled that way a lot about wolves and whaling in the Pacific Northwest. Some years ago, quite a long time ago, there was a man named Vine Deloria who taught at the University of Colorado. He was a Native American activist, really bright, wonderful guy. And he invited me to a meeting on campus of a lot of Native American elders representing a lot of different reservations and tribes. And I wasn't allowed to ask questions, take notes, or take pictures, which was fine. I was honored. I was the only white guy in the room. And then at the end, they asked me what I thought. And, I still feel that way today. I wish they wouldn't do what they do. But who am I as a white guy and a member of, a global white population, if you will, to tell them what not to do? I mean, in a prescriptive way. But the compassion with which these Native Americans spoke about, the ceremonies they perform using, if you will, a whole animal from the coat to make a tent to clothes and eating. I mean, yeah, I wish they wouldn't do it, but I don't feel that I am in any position to tell them what to do. So that's my answer. And it's, I really believe that, it's an aside, but I often believe that the human beings as a collection of humans across the planet, we'd be a lot better off if we honored some of the cultural traditions that we have.
Well, you're getting a bit of pushback here. What I would say is it's not really a question of telling people. It's the right to raise issues, isn't it?
Oh, right.
With anybody.
Yeah, right. But that's why at the end of the meeting, I said that. I had said nothing. I had not. And all these things that are coming in, I absolutely agree with you. It's just that, and I'm not talking, and I'm talking, this was a meeting about Native Americans and their relationships with non-human animals. And I really didn't say a word. I didn't take any notes. I didn't have any pictures. It was before iPhones, or you could sneak something. I don't wear glasses, but if you did, you could have a camera in your glasses. But I just kind of felt that that's all I could say. I wish they didn't do what they did. So, I mean, I couldn't say anything more. I mean, who am I to say, stop it? And they'll say, well, look at the group of humans to whom you belong, and look what they've done. Anyway, the bottom line.
Obviously, but the part of it that I was interested in is when you said not a lot of has happened since the declaration that they're sentient. And I was wondering about that from us, from the Animal Rights Show, is going to say, well, that's because sentience has just been translated as, well, we have to enhance their welfare rather than.
Yes. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm going to. That's why we wrote the Animals Agenda. That's why Jessica and I wrote it, to replace the science of animal welfare with the science, if you will, of animal well-being, where we focus on individuals. We have a whole section in there, Roger, that says, so we're bettering the welfare. So we're increasing 2 square inches to a cage where you can still shove in 10 chickens. I mean, you're right on the mark. And that's why I wrote it's not, that's why I wrote another paper that said compassionate conservation is not animal welfare. Well, compassionate conservation is not welfarism gone wild, which was applying the same thought that, well, yes, it's okay to kill kangaroos, but now we have to be more humane. It's like humane washing, for example. And that's exactly why we wrote the Animals Agenda, because we have been thinking about that sort of reasoning, So yes, we'll give elephants another 100 or 1,000 square feet to rot in a zoo, but we've increased their welfarism, but not their well-being. Yeah.
I know you've brought up zoos, actually, Mark. That's a perfect opportunity, I think, to move into another part of conservationism. And actually, a few people have mentioned it in the chat as well, as how zoos, which I think is a complete euphemism for basically for prisons for other animals. And I'm sure most of our viewers would agree, and I'm sure you agree as well, that often zoos will say that they are basically providing a very important role in conservation. I'd love to get your views on this. And also, we a while ago you sent us the article about the baby orangutan that was killed, 4 days old. And could we maybe talk a little bit about this?
Yeah. I mean, zoos need major reform, and it's no secret that I and others have argued that zoos need to make reforms, and they could become rehab centers. So no more captive breeding, no more shipping animals around as breeding machines. A woman, her name will come to me, but I just forgot it. But she wrote, when we were talking years ago, she came up with the term like musical chairs, musical animals, musical semen. And so we've got to stop that. And yes, euthanasia, which is a word I created because when zoos kill healthy animals, they say they euthanize them, but it's not euthanasia, it's euthanasia. So
great word. Love it. It's a great word. I love it.
Thank you. No, thank you. A lot of zoo people don't agree with you, Wendy, but that's probably good news. But yeah, like the killing of
I give a shit.
You're right. The killing of the baby orangutan, 4-day-old at the Basel Zoo. In fact, I wrote about it, and then the Jane Goodall Institute put out a very strong statement against it. The killing of the 4 chimpanzees in, was it Sweden? I think it was in Sweden, who got out. They got out of their cages. The zoo was closed, and they wound up, killing them. Marius, the giraffe, who, is, the poster child or the poster corpse, which is a horrible way to put it for anti-euthanasia. So, compassionate conservation could apply to that as well. And the argument would simply be that, for example, you could argue, well, the animals shouldn't have been there in the first place. Absolutely. But they're there. So compassionate conservation wouldn't allow Marius to have been killed, or a 4-day-old orangutan to get killed. They made no effort to find it was a female, to find her a home. They decided she wouldn't do well without her mom. But of course, a lot of orang people disagreed. But killing's the easy way out, right? You kill Marius, you kill the baby orangutan, and then you can debate this till the orangutans come home. But the fact of the matter is, they're dead, right?
It happens all the time, though. A chimpanzee was murdered here in the zoo a few months ago because he managed to escape. And according to the people of the zoo, he was the alpha male, and the zoo was open at the time. So
where was this? Sorry,
Greece.
Yeah.
Greece.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, right. Yep.
And the usual excuse you hear is, yes, but there were humans on site. They were human children on site, so he had to be killed. And it seems that happens everywhere, wherever zoos exist. This kind of killings exist too.
Yeah, I mean, it's the epitome, or among the many epitomes of speciesism. Once again, we don't just shoot humans who go berserk in the street. I'm not being, well, depends where you live. I mean, here it's become kind of pro forma, but right. I mean, once again, it's the easy way out. It's like it's the easy thing to do. One species, dominates another. The squirrels, they're invasive. They come in, they displace native species. And, another argument, actually, that Ari and Wallach, we actually had it in a paper, is if you're focusing on sentience, non-natives don't suffer less than natives and native animals. I mean, it sounds absurd to people when you say that, because they'll go, well, of course they don't. And then it gets really silent when a particular person has been responsible for using 1080 or snares or traps or shooting, animals who are non-native. And well, they don't suffer less. What is this? The attempted interesting thing. Oh yeah. I like that. Somebody said to me, thanks, Laura. That's great. Somebody said to me,
hey, Laura. Hey, Laura. Just saying hello to Laura, sorry.
Somebody said to me something a couple of years ago, and I started writing something on it, but I didn't know where to go, was that if you have great apes in captivity, they should all be taught sign language so they could tell you what they want or don't want. It's wonderful. Just last week.
Where to go?
What's that?
Oh, where to go?
Or where to go, right? And just last week, I posted an interview with two people who wrote a book about the research and the abuse of the language using chimpanzees, and it's just very interesting. These people. Well, one of them, Bob Ingersoll, worked on the project, and I mean, I knew some of the story, but how traumatic their lives were, and that Washoe, the famous chimpanzee who merited an obituary in the New York Times, couldn't raise her daughter, and not only focusing on the abuse of the animals, which of course is central, but also what the data mean. And a couple of weeks ago, I published an article about an essay that a woman named Gisela Kaplan wrote. She is in Australia, making the same arguments for fieldwork. I'm a field biologist, and I am very sensitive to that, because sometimes the methods you use, even if they don't, quote, harm the animals, sometimes just being there can change their behavior and change the quality of the data that are collected. So once again, it's just a very, very difficult situation. But I just, maybe I have to sit down and write something, but teaching captive great apes sign language sounded really,
that's a brilliant
sounded
idea.
interesting to me. And I think it also would be enriching to them. I mean, I remember I wrote back to the woman, I said, look, I don't know how you could do that, but it would be enriching to them, because they're wallowing away in, captivity, and they're getting attention, and they like being challenged intellectually. So anyway, yeah.
Mark, where does compassionate conservation stand in terms of captive conservation? So if another animal is in that situation where, okay, they're not able to live in their natural habitat for whatever reason that might be, how does compassionate conservation sort of view that situation in terms of, is it okay to have them captive if they can't be returned into their natural habitat? Or, and especially I know often in zoos, people will say, oh, we have to keep the species going. And although they can no longer live, there's no longer the habitat for them to survive. In captivity, we can keep them alive. Where do you stand in? Do you have a different angle on that situation?
Yeah, I mean, taking the second example first is, they'll say, well, these animals are disappearing in the wild, so the animals who are living in cages are ambassadors for their species. I mean, I hate to say it, but I've taught in a jail and taught in prisons, and I'm not saying this in any negative way, but when we had this exact discussion, when I had this exact discussion with the inmates, they all agreed they're not ambassadors for humans. And they weren't saying it in a joking way. So where does it fall? Well, for me, as a biologist, species come and go. They do go extinct. You'd like to think that it was the extinction or the loss in numbers was caused by natural processes. And some people say, well, it is a natural process because humans are superior and we're allowed to do this, but that's just a load of crap. So the compassionate conservation would say, once again, no more captive breeding, no more bringing animals in to zoos, especially from the wild, which I don't know how often that really happens anymore. And it would be turning zoos into rehab centers, if you will, that as animals, they're going to die, but as animals die, or you can do something with them to give them a better life, very, very few are ever reintroduced to the wild. I mean, there have been some projects, but when zoos say, oh yeah, we need all these elephants because they're going to be reintroduced into the wild. No, they're not. So let's just, cut out that argument. So I think compassionate conservation would say focusing on the individuals who are there. It's like assisted living for humans, give them the very best life you can, because it would be mean and cruel to just dump them out into their, native or natural habitat. They just wouldn't make it. They don't have the social, or if they're predators, they wouldn't have, the skills to get food or to avoid being eaten. If species disappear as a direct result, do we have a responsibility? Yeah, I mean, I think we do. I mean, it's once again, it's one of those thorny questions in the sense of what can we do to help them along as they're being abused by, let's just say, other humans. It reminds me of the question that if humans are responsible for harming individuals of a species, sometimes it's very practical. Birds flying into windows in skyscrapers, or getting electrocuted, or being hit by windmills. Yeah, we have a responsibility to take care of them. But of course, we also have a responsibility not to do things like that could harm the animals. And I know around the world there are cities, I suppose they could be countries, but cities that are really paying close attention to how windows and reflections and light affects insects and birds, for example, who are flying around.
And wind tunnels now as well. They're the kind of really big things, because they're trying to do ones with this oscillate now, but they're much better for birds. I know we are very short on time now, Marc. So we were wondering about whether we could invite you back sometime to finish off all the things that we wanted to talk to you about. And as a plug, this is your new book, or one of them, is it?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So, well, get rid of the slide on the right. That was a mock-up. No, seriously, it created a lot of, I got some nasty emails. The cover's the one on the left of the mutt. Yeah. Not a Frenchie. No, and I'm serious about it.
Because of the breathing difficulties and that kind of thing from the breed. Was it that kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they can't walk, they can't mate, they can't give birth, they die young.
I'll take it off the screen so you don't get beaten up. Go on, carry on.
Well, no, I mean, publishers do mock-up covers, and I mean, in all honesty, we've got a new cover, but they do a mock-up cover. I said I didn't like it in the beginning, and I'm not, that's just the name of the game, to be honest with you. Yes, that's my new book, and I'm thrilled. The singer Joan Baez did the original drawings in it.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's I just I always say, I just got done going through the proofs. I'm done. I cannot look at them anymore. So that's what I've been doing for the last 3 weeks. And I really love the book. I'm just being honest. It's an A to Z guide to all things dog. It's a fun book. So.
Yeah, Nella and I both had questions about dogs, but we don't think you might have to shoot off, do you, Mark? Because it's 5:02.
Oh, I've got about 10 minutes because when I couldn't get on, I'm actually got another thing to do. But when I couldn't get on, I was hoping that Wendy would wake up from her nap and.
Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry. Do you know what? Because I turned my phone off.
But I couldn't get on because I was on Safari, not Chrome, and I'm such a moron on computers. I thought I switched over to Chrome, and that's why I asked Wendy, would you email it to me so I could open it in Chrome? So anyway, yeah, keep rolling. We've got about, I'd say 10 minutes. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about dogs because often their oppression goes unnoticed. Since they are so much celebrated in our cultures, people tend to believe that they are not oppressed. And I was thinking lately about it, especially after the catastrophic earthquake in Turkey, where all these lives were lost, like thousands of lives. There was an incident with a dog that came with a Mexican rescue team, went to Turkey with a Mexican rescue team, Proteo, who died because of exhaustion.
Yeah. And
there were all these articles in newspapers celebrating the hero and all this, way of thinking that how brave he was, how dedicated he died on duty and blah, blah, blah. And they were challenged by animal rights advocates about the lack of consent and stuff like that. But it seems that there is a belief running really deep that dogs are so close to humans that are happy to die for them in the same way some humans would die for their dog friend.
Well, I think the answer that I give to questions like that, and I really mean it, it's not a brush off, is depends on the individual dog. I mean, some dogs really enjoy that kind of work. It's enriching for them. They have a tight bond with their human. Some rescue dogs I've known in Colorado have far better lives than any homed dog. I'll use that just because they're free ranging and feral dogs, have better lives than most home dogs I've ever met. And when a dog doesn't like to do it, then, if you will, they're not used in that task. Do they put their lives in danger? Yeah, they do. And there's a lot of questions about that. But all I can say is the people I know that use rescue dogs, and I don't, it is a use of them. Maybe there's a better word for it. Really take care of their dogs, and they're very, very careful about it. And it's almost like a fire person going into a house that's burning down and getting burned or killed. I mean, I think about that. Can the dog, in fact, I just posted yesterday an article about, it's called Consenting Cats Are Happier Cats. I wrote it with Steve Dale, who knows cats. I don't know cats well because I'm allergic. I mean, I wish I weren't allergic to every cat in the world, I think, because I love cats. But consent and agency are two words that are popping up across the board now. Consent, and, people would say, well, dogs can't tell you if they're happy or sad. Well, they can't tell you in English or Greek or Spanish or Italian or Russian or whatever language, but they can tell you whether they agree with you or like something, right? I mean, and if you're living with a companion animal and you can't read them, you shouldn't be living with a companion animal. I know people will get really pissed off at me for saying that, because people will say, well, they can't talk to you. I know people who can't talk to me. Well, big deal, but they can consent. And agency means granting them the freedom to have control and choices in their lives. And I've been writing a lot about it, and I'm doing a second edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals. And I've got a lot more in there on consent than I did, not because my attitude has changed, but I'm so thrilled that people are really talking about consent and agency in non-human animals. So, can a dog consent to being used in rescue? Well, yeah, they can. And if you're sensitive to them, do they know it's dangerous? No, not really. I mean, let's face it, but that's where the human comes in to say, okay, I'm putting a dog, say, in a dangerous situation, not where, if you will, death is certain. And if they don't, if the dog doesn't enjoy the adrenaline rush or the work, then don't use them. It's not rocket science to me. So
it's a difficult situation, isn't it? Because humans have created the situation. We have created the situation where we are breeding other animals, dogs, for example, into these situations to use for our own gain, whatever that gain may be. And I'm learning so much more about, dogs, like you said, they're individuals. Every individual is going to be different. But there are also certain things that humans are trying to breed into them. Like getting to know Dylan has been a whole journey of I could write a book on Dylan after even just a year. But I know that there were certain things that I would have always said before the Dylan show. I would never do this. Like dogs, I would never get a dog to do this or do that. And then having learned about Dylan as an individual, there are certain things now that I think actually he loves doing that. He really, because he's a so-called working breed of dog, he loves to have a job to do. He absolutely thrives when you play games with him, when you get him to do stuff. And like before, I was said, oh no, that's just like, you're just getting him to bring stuff to you, or like getting him to do a trick or something.
There's a problem here, though. There's a problem here, Wendy, in the sense that the idea of working dogs, but also we're talking about selective breeding here. So part of the idea of that.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. No, that's what I'm talking about, though, is that we've created that, but then you have these individuals here who do love to do this stuff because they've been put in this situation. I'm not saying that is right.
They've been bred to be loyal. So going back to the kind of putting themselves in danger, they probably would do that for their human.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's not. I'm not saying that's right. Of course, I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that we have these situations where it's like we have this individual who really, wants to do things that maybe in an ideal rights world we wouldn't do, because they wouldn't be here in the first place if we had.
Yes, you were. You were talking about throwing Dylan into a burning building. That's what you were.
Right. Dylan, go for it. But it's
you have his best interest in mind. That does not mean that those who use them for search and rescue do the same, or all of them do the same.
No, I don't.
They don't. But what I'm saying is, I think what Wendy just said, and it's something I've been pushing, say, with dogs, that they're individuals. I mean, I've lived with a lot of dogs. I've rescued dogs who go from 0 to 180 in personality. Some dogs enjoyed certain things, others didn't. So the ones who enjoyed doing something, they did it. But the other thing that I think is, very important, and there's, that's a great, another comment from Laura. But the important thing is we're putting because of who we are, say, in our relationship with dogs, we're putting our individual preferences, likes and dislikes on a dog. But when I lived in the mountains, the dogs, I had 2 dogs. I think I once had 3, but the neighborhood dogs came down. They all hung out at my house because I gave them treats. I spread food all over my land, and they'd spend the day looking for treats the size of a marble. I mean, some were big dogs, and it wouldn't have even been, they'd just drop it in their mouth and swallow it. The point I'm trying to make is that among them, there were individuals. Some liked working for food, some didn't. So the ones who liked working for food, did it. And you've got the same kind of variation in the humans who, quote, use dogs in what could be exploitive ways. So I saw somebody said it's still exploitation, but in some cases it is, in some cases it's not. I personally would not want to use a dog in a situation where it was almost guaranteed or it was a real high probability that they would get injured. But they're also nimble. I've seen snow rescues that were amazing. And I don't think that, well, first of all, the dogs didn't know the danger. There was no way they could know the danger. But I never saw anything in some of these dogs where they felt uneasy. And dogs will feel uneasy in certain situations, like people who jump out of planes with dogs, for example, and they think, oh, the dog loves it. Well, the dog's hugging you because they're probably scared poopless and they don't know what in the world to do. So I think it once again comes down to being very sure that you know your animal. I mean, it's the same with using, animals in other situations, like dancing bears. No, I don't think they like it. I mean, honestly, bio bears, with whom I've worked very closely in China. No, they don't like it. No one's going to argue to me that there's individual differences among moon bears in China. So some don't mind having something in their gallbladder. But this is a really useful discussion, I think, for people, because I do know dogs, and I know dogs have different personalities. And like I said, the many dogs with whom I shared my home and my heart were really different. Some didn't like going outside if they knew a bear or a cougar, say, had been around at night, and I knew they weren't there now. Where others just walked out of the front door and just didn't give a hoot about who was there at night. So they had a choice. They could go out or not.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's constantly trying to look at the situation, and the way I try and look at it for Dylan is what I'm doing in his interests? Is it good for him? Has he got some agency? Has he got some say in this wherever possible? And also not looking at him doing things to suit me or to please me. I always try to think, right, is this thing I'm doing with him, is this for his mental stimulation, for his enrichment? Yes. Is it for his gain and not mine? Do you know what I mean? So I'm always trying to think of it. And I think that's where we ought to be with these other animals who are here because they're here. We had no control over that. I suppose the difference is, in an animal rights world, we would not be breeding these other animals into existence in the first place for our own gain. We're just in that situation.
And what Carolyn just said is really true, and that really summarizes what I think I've been trying to say, that safety, they have to trust us, they have to feel safe. There's going to be individual differences among them, and not knowingly put them in danger. It's the same kind of arguments that come up with war dogs. And I've talked to some people who have been with war dogs in very, very difficult situations. And in all honesty, in a couple of situations, I know more than I wish I knew. And I don't mean negatively about the dogs, but just situations where they've been used. And some dogs like it or seem not to, they seem to like it, and other dogs don't. But here's the bottom line, and we can pick this up at another time because I love this kind of stuff, is if you get a dog or a cat or you have another companion animal, you have to become fluent in dog or fluent in cat or dog literate. And they are telling you things. Because I've, just walking around Boulder and people will say, oh, my dog's happy. What do you think? And I go, well, I mean, I'm nice about it, but I said, I don't think they're particularly happy, or I don't think they're feeling particularly safe. Look at their tail, look at their ears. I mean, I give dog lessons in the street or at dog parks, but it's really fun because people are eager. A lot of the people I know, I mean, they're not running puppy mills or, using dogs for meals. They really want to learn dog and give their dog the best life possible. And I got criticized last summer, and I wrote an article based on an email I got. And, the woman said, well, you're not being fair to people who have the best intentions in mind, but just don't know dog. And she was right. So my articles now are not, they start off being positive. I mean, this book that I just finished is more positive than negative. It's not like beating people up because they are doing something that's, say, bad for a dog, but they don't know they are. It's like, this is what you can do to make their lives better.
My question really quickly, Mark, if you've still got time, is I wanted to ask you, because dogs and cats and other so-called domesticated animals find themselves in this very strange position in terms of, it seems like they're more, they're in a more liberated position. They're obviously not. There's no way that they are liberated. They're no. Just, in another category. But how does the movement do better? Because in terms of animal rights and liberation, for example, so obviously we can try to look at their well-being in the situation that they're in and do better for their enrichment and for them to flourish and thrive in terms of their well-being, but also how do we do better for them within the movement of animal rights? Because it's a very different, we advocate a lot for so-called farmed animals, in terms of we don't want to breed them and consume them, but how do we do better for dogs? Because people think that they're in such a better situation, but they're not.
They're
obviously.
not. Stop breeding.
No.
Stop. I'm throwing stuff out and I'll probably get nasty emails if anybody listens, but stop making designer dogs. Stop breeding dogs who are going to have crappy lives. Okay. There's enough dogs out there who need homes, who, just do the numbers. There's enough dogs out there who need homes that we don't need any more bred dogs, if you will. But I'm going to stop there because it really has a lot more. There's a lot more to say, and I've got about 2 minutes now. So you're all so nice, but I've got to go.
You've had enough. Well, if we get abusive emails about you, we'll bring you back and read them out to you, Mark. So
you don't have to. You don't have to do that. I don't get a lot, but I do get some that I always say put together strings of expletives that I've never even thought would go together. I don't answer. I don't answer them, of course, because then
creative writing.
I do. And then they'll write back and say, did you get my blanking email? Of course, I don't answer them. But I noticed that after about between 2 and 4, people stopped writing to me and maybe they got it that I'm not going to answer them. So I do need to go. I really do.
Yes. Well, we want to say thanks to everybody who tuned in. Yeah. And we've got to go as well. Thank you very much,
Thank you
Mark,
so much for being here.
Well, thank you all for your interest.
Thank you, Mark.
And take care.
Yeah.
Give Dylan a big hug.
Check out Mark's book. I will give Dylan a big hug.
Tell Dylan he's a good boy.
Only if he consents to it, though, Wendy.
Yeah, he does love a hug, actually.
Right,
He doesn't like being
we're going.
Bye, everyone.